All right, it is January 1st of 2017, at least according to the time of this sermon. And of course, want to hope and pray that everyone has a safe New Year's. Welcome aboard as we continue to go verse by verse through the Bible. Today, we're going to finish studying the book of Acts. I believe so. My wife says we'll see. I've been saying for years we're going to do thus and such and thus and such, and winds up not doing it. But looks like the narrative goes rather smoothly and rather quickly in chapters 27 and 28, because it deals primarily with Paul's perils on the sea. And just one thing I want to do, just want to send a shout out to Stu, just to show you that the program is live and that you're watching it live. So just say good morning to Stu and hope you have a great day, my friend, as well as everybody. Just have a wonderful day, and good thing to start the new year off in church. It's good to start any day off in the fellowship. Acts chapter 27, we're going to go through the narrative rather quickly. Paul is heading to Rome, and that's what I should have titled this, Paul arrives at Rome, because that's where he's going to wind up. That's where the ship is going to take him. That's where the Spirit of God had comforted him and assured him that he would go, because that's part of God's plan. And all the events, good and bad, and most of the events we would categorize as bad or painful in Paul's experience, was all designed by God to bring him to the ultimate goal of being before Caesar and to spread the gospel in Rome. You have to understand something about Rome. Rome was a very closed city. You just couldn't walk into Rome and do whatever you want to do. And access to the Caesar was even less a possibility. And so for Paul to have this opportunity was nothing short of the miraculous work of the Lord. And that's what we're witnessing here. You'd be surprised what God can do when you are fully yielded to Him. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners, verse 1, unto one named Julius, the centurion of the Augustus band. Now, Julius will be what I would describe as a primary character in this account in both chapters 27 and 28. And he belonged to the imperial regiment, which was an honorary title given to certain troops. The Augustus band, a centurion, again, commanded 100 soldiers. The word imperial means revered. He was one of a few of the top soldiers who was revered and was given a company of men to lead. Verse 2, and entering into a ship of okay, brain, let's do this, Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Now, if you study the book of Acts, you will see different uses of pronouns, how the pronouns are used. And when it says in verse 2, being with us, the use of the pronoun we or us indicates Luke accompanied Paul on this journey. Sometimes we'll give a different expression of whether he's there or not, but the words we and us indicate that he was there. He accompanied Paul on the journey. Adramyttium, the home base of the ship, was southeast of Troas in northern Asia Minor, and evidently the ship was making its last journey to its base before the stormy winter sailing season set in. During the winter season, ships just simply did not sail. And this one shouldn't have either. But of course, this was all part of the plan of God. And the centurion wanted to find a ship bound for Rome along the way, or to get to the Enaeus road and use it to transport the prisoners. Now, I want you to get out of your mind any kind of transportation that we have today, because none of that existed. Most transportation was done by ships, as we talked about in previous studies. Most of it was done by ships, and there was a limited amount of time that shipping was done, because as you see when we look at Euroclydon, that tempestuous tornado style wind, it wreaked havoc and destroyed many vessels, including the one that Paul was on, which we'll see in the text, and how God rescued him and those prisoners as well. Verse 3, and the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius, now remember this is the centurion, courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends and to refresh himself. I like that. Now, Aristarchus evidently accompanied Paul to be his helper, and he stayed with Paul during his Roman incarceration. And you'll find that in Colossians chapter 4, verse 10, and Philemon chapter 1, verse 24. And notice that God extended even further grace by Julius allowing Paul, treating Paul with kindness. When it says courteously entreated Paul, it means that he showed tremendous kindness to Paul and allowed him to enjoy the company of his friends. When it says that he gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself, it means to enjoy the company of his friends. That's what it refers to refresh himself there. And really that's what friends should do. I mean, when you go to the home of friends, this is what we should expect. I mean, you look at our age, and our age is so individually consumed with itself that it finds itself content to just be by itself, to enhance that selfish nature. And that's a danger for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of us, when we become self-centered, we become self-consumed, and oftentimes we don't become refreshed. It's just sensible to have a company of like-minded people, believers, to be with you. And the purpose, again, of being in the fellowship is to be refreshed, to build each other up, because there is no place for that as an individual in Scripture. I mean, when you look at the plan of God and how God wants people built up, you never find it as just an individual act of selfishness. There's always this incorporation to a good fellowship of believers, and everyone in the church should be there to build each other up, not just to be together and be together for together's sake. But there's divine purpose beyond just being in the same building, and that is to refresh oneself, and that's what we should do. And it's sad that oftentimes Christians are not friends. I don't know how you do that. I don't even know how that works. I mean, I have associates in the world who are unsaved. I get that. And there's a limitation to, I guess, the relationships that I have there, but I still have to be friendly towards everybody. I still have to have genuine love towards everybody, regardless where they're at. But the Christian relationship is almost performed with the attitude of a business association in many cases. It's like we're doing business with each other rather than trying to refresh one another. And yet we sit and wonder why the church has little or no power or no impact in the lives of people. I mean, how can we be Christians and not refresh one another? Our recent trip up to Northern California was quite refreshing on many levels. And we visited three wonderful groups of people. We visited the Young family, Clara and Joel and Sherry, and now Vincent. Crazy Vincent is not added to the mix. I call him Fire Stick, and he'll know what that means. And it was just a blessing to spend time always with the Young family. And when I go there, as I told them, I said, time stands still for me here, because there's so many wonderful memories of 40 plus years of being associated with them, and all the wonderful beauty of having that kind of relationship. And it's quite refreshing. It was like I forgot all about Southern California. I didn't miss it for a second. In fact, my heart even yearned more and more to be closer up to Northern Cal. And if a door opens by SoCal, there's no doubt. I mean, my heart was really stirred to be in that area. It always does, because that's where I got saved, and there's so many rich, wonderful memories there, and they don't go away. There are a lot of things I've experienced I've long forgotten, but that's not one of them. And then we met Stu. I met Stu. Wonderful, wonderful man who's actually been watching and listening to this ministry for some time. It was just a privilege to be with him and to hopefully, and I believe so, encourage him and refresh him during the time of his need. And I want to continue to do that, and not just to go high and by, but no, I want to continue to be there to refresh the man. And I told him, look, here's my phone number, and if you need me, you call. If I need to fly, I will. Let me know what you want me to do. And I don't make the invitation to everybody, but I made it to him. And I believe that's what the Lord wants. He wants us to be available to minister to people. And it was a great blessing to spend time with him. And he blessed me with a wonderful gift, a guitar. I'm floored. And he even offered to do lessons. I don't know how you do it 400 miles away, but I'm sure there's a way to do a lot of things that that I don't know. But God willing, we'll see. I mean, today's only the first of the year. I was going to say year's almost gone, but that would be kind of crazy right now. Anyway, and then last was Michelle, how she had been a supporter, a financial supporter, and a supporter of prayer, with prayer rather, of this ministry for some time. And how you watching this and you watching this and anyone seeing this is a result of her giving and the giving of other saints. None of this is free, but I don't spend time begging people for anything, because if we're listening to the Holy Ghost, we'll do what we should, and Michelle is a perfect example of that. She said the Spirit of God says give it to this, and she does it. And when she does, it goes right into all this, all the technology, all the equipment, all the cost of getting the space to do it. Ustream is cost. Everything costs. Everything we do costs something. But we get it out, and people support flakes and false teachers by the millions, and we basically go by the scraps what people do. So that's what we do. And we're thankful for the privilege. So, but the time up there was quite refreshing for me and for others, and it hurt to have to get back in that car and go home. Because there's refreshment. Down here, forget it. It doesn't happen. No, all I see down here is people that turn your back on you. And let me add this element. Community Missionary Baptist Church. That was a refreshing experience, and to meet their pastor for the first time. And this man didn't know me from the man on the moon until until he found out that the seminary that he went to, that I was one of his professors. He didn't know that. And the whole story behind that is for another time. It was quite interesting how God just picks that one moment to get us to know each other, and then he offered me the pulpit to preach. And I had no intention of preaching. I went there to hear the word of God, and I wound up teaching the thing. And it was just a wonderful experience, and the fellowship with the older saints and some of the ones I've never met. It was refreshing. And one young man just kept saying, that sermon, that message, it just impacted my life. And I said, well, embrace it. Embrace it with your life and see what the Lord will do. And he just kept saying it over and over and over. Even when we left, he just kept shaking his head going, I needed that. I said, okay. So it was all a refreshing to him and the people I've met. And one young lady, Alicia, which I used to teach when she was 14. I was teaching her in Sunday school many years ago. She was there. And just like many years ago, she's there encouraging. And it's refreshing to hear from her. It's refreshing to hear from Sister Mary. At a time where a lot of the saints have gone home to be with the Lord, she was there. It was a refreshing time. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what the Bible's talking about. We're there to help each other. We're not there to conduct business, then going about our business like we don't care. Like, I got that over with. No, it should hurt you to leave because you want to be there, spend time with them. You're not consumed with yourself and your grief or your whatever. You're there and you're being built up and strengthened. And look at Paul's circumstance. Of course he was happy. Dude's chained up to a soldier. He didn't do anything. He's years in jail with no charges or charges that weren't relative to anything, and he had to appeal to Caesar to get out of the mess because the Jews want to kill him. I mean, come on. Of course he's happy to see the saints. He probably hadn't seen none of them, except those that were there to minister to him. Maybe Luke and maybe Aristarchus, but that's about it. Amazing. Verse 4, and when we had launched from thence, we sailed unto Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found the ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. Again, these verses remind us of the difficulty of sailing from the east to the west in the Mediterranean Sea, because prevailing winds blew from the west, so that ships would sail to the east of Cyprus and proceed with difficulty along the southwest coast of Asia Minor and to the coast of Crete. And in Myra, which was a port city on the south coast of Asia Minor, the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and it was a grain ship. We talked about that already. You're going to see that it is a grain ship in this chapter, verse 38. And we talked about the fact that many of the vessels that people got on were grain ships, were transport vessels, because they were large enough to carry a substantial amount of people, and plus they were big enough to be able to travail in these kinds of seas. And evidently this grain ship was large enough to carry the 276 passengers or prisoners, of course, which was the total number of the people who were on the ship, is seen in verse 37 of this chapter, which we'll see. The grain ships would commonly sail north to Asia Minor and then make their way across the Mediterranean, using the islands for as much protection as it could obtain from the seas. It had to make different jumps from island to island and to navigate the seas, and they had no navigational charts and everything like we had today. A lot of ships were destroyed in these rough waters, and we'll see it was nothing short of the miracle of God that, well, anyone knew anything. There are times in this particular narrative when you find the ship given over to the seas and the clouds were covering up any stars. They didn't know where they were at. Had no idea. Verse 7, when they had sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the winds not suffering us, we sailed unto Crete over against Salmon. And hardly passing it, it came into a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh unto was a city of Lacia. So Paul's journey on this second ship took him from Myra toward the island of Cnidus, or people say Cnidus because the C, I guess, is silent, or one of those words, and then southwest to the south side of Crete to a place called Fair Havens. And the reason why it's called the Fair Havens was because it had a good harbor. In fact, they were able to get to this location without any difficulty, according to verse 8. And so far, everything is pretty much favorable to them, but that's going to change. It's going to change in a rather dramatic fashion, I might add. Now, when much time was spent, verse 9, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading of the ship, but also of our lives. Keep that in mind. So, if the words the fast in verse 9 refers to the Day of Atonement, which occurred late in September to early October, then it would be extremely dangerous for them to travel by sea. After that time of the year, unsettled weather patterns over the Mediterranean made sailing very, very hazardous. In those days, sea traffic ceased by early November, so they weren't about to, no ships or no ship captains with any brains would dare put a vessel in the water in November. They just didn't do it. Paul had warned him of the dangers ahead. He knew because of his own experiences with many sailings and apparently many shipwrecks, according to 2 Corinthians 11:25, which I believe we saw last week or last time or the time before last, when he talks about his perils, the perils of Paul. So he's experienced shipwrecks. He experienced these things. And the night and the day was in the deep. He experienced that already. So he's telling him what he knows. And so Paul, verse 10, discerned that if they took their present course, it would conclude with injury, great loss to the cargo, the ship, and to the people in the ship. And some people debate whether Paul's experiences gave him the insight that caused him to say these things, or whether it was divine discernment. And in my commentary, I opted for the latter, but now I'm opting for both. I think both of his experiences, as well as divine discernment, gave him the opportunity to see, look, this is not good. This is not a good thing for us. Verse 11, very interesting. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. I want you to remember that point as we go later, because when this ship starts getting tore up, they're going to believe Paul and not the master of the ship. Everything's going to turn around. Sometimes, I don't know why people want to learn the hard way, but sometimes they do learn the hard way. Sometimes they don't learn at all. But as usual, no one ever believes the preacher. So Julius believed the experience of the sailing master and the ship master, who was the one who hired out his vessel, or a portion of it, for purposes of transporting these prisoners. I mean, who is this guy Paul? He's no ship master. He doesn't own the vessel. I mean, I would imagine common sense would lean towards the owner of the ship and the hired shipmaster. He knows. They know. Who's Paul? What vessel has he ever, ruddered? Nothing. So, I believe what this guy says. Okay. We'll see it all change later. I mean, they have the experience. They should know more about sailing than Paul. Well, the fact is that might be true, and it may not be true. It may very well not be true. I've always believed that it is inherent in humans not to believe God's man. Paul may not have had any knowledge of vessels, which he did, obviously, not as a captain, but as a passenger. But he has an edge over all these people, and that is he knows the Lord. He knows the God who is in control of these things. But it's inherent in humans not to believe God's man. I've been in the ministry since 1978, I believe. I've been a Christian since 76. So that's a long time. And there's no question in my mind that it is inherent in people not to believe God's man. I experience this to this day. I experience it at my job. I experience it everywhere. It's just this snarky, snobbish attitude. What does he know? What does he think he knows? I don't believe that most people have any confidence in God's man or man, no matter how many times he or they have been used of God over and over again in their presence. Or not in their presence. Just the fact that God uses them. There is always mistrust. There's always this doubting. There's always this inward scorn that people have towards God's man, which is just another reason why the church is so impotent to really make any real headway spiritually. I mean, the fact is that there are a lot of churches that have this mindset. They don't really believe God's man. They don't. They'll believe some heathen. They'll believe themselves, but they don't believe God's man. They act like they can they believe in scripture, which tells us, commands you to have confidence in the men of God, but they don't read that part, I guess. Maybe they don't have that in their Bible. I don't even know how you can. Both testaments teach that. But, you know, I mean, no matter how courteous Julius treated Paul, he had more confidence in the shipmaster and owner than Paul. And I'm not, speaking necessarily bad about Julius. Again, he's looking at Paul. Paul's a prisoner, and this guy is the shipmaster. This is his vessel. Obviously he's, ruddered the thing many times before and is still here. So nothing personal, Paul, but I believe this guy here. Okay. The fact is that one should have more confidence in the man who is called of God, God being the creator, than in the creation who rejects God. So I'm not saying that Julius necessarily just rejected Paul because he didn't believe Paul's man of God, but I'm saying a lot of people do. Matthew Henry says something, quoting, he said, "But the centurion gave more regard to the opinion of the master and the owner of the ship than to Paul's, for every man is to be credited in his own profession ordinarily." So he's saying, well, this is the guy this is his ship. He knows what he's doing. But such a man as Paul, who was so intimate with heaven, was rather to be regarded in seafaring matters than the most celebrated sailors. Note, those know not what dangers they run themselves into, who will be governed more by human prudence than by divine revelation. The centurion was very civil to Paul, and yet would not be governed by his advice. Note, many will show respect to good ministers that will not take their advice. And he quoted Ezekiel 33:31. They'll hear your words, but they're not going to do them. And to them, you're just like a lovely song, and they'll hear your words, but they will do them not. And the rest of that chapter talks about judgment as the end result of not listening. Oh, they'll come as my people come, and they'll sit as my people do, and they'll hear your words, but they will not do them. Oh, you sound wonderful to them, just like a lovely song, and it'll be soothing to them, but because their heart is filled with their covetousness, they don't care what you say. Their covetous heart overrides any obedience to the wonderful truth. So when Ezekiel 33 talks about people coming, they're talking about thee again by the side of the house, and they're all saying, let's go hear what the word of God has to say. That's a mockery. Say mocker. Let's go hear what God says today. They really didn't care. It was entertainment to them, just like a lot of people are entertained by preachers. I'm not an entertainer. Not at all. So if you're watching or listening right now and you want to be entertained, you're watching the wrong program, because that's not it. I am absolutely convinced that the church as a whole has no respect, love, or concern for the man of God. None. Zero. She may speak great flowery language, but she really doesn't mean it. I speak of this from personal experience. I know of many who can speak of the same experience. I know how it is for people to speak your praises and then turn away from you. I just had that happen this year, or last year, and I can say last year, where people, swore up and down and sideways. Oh, God sent you to us and blah. Gone. Gone. Like that. Gone. I know it, so I get it. But what was the reason? Well, same reason that the others have, and that is they didn't want to hear or the truth anymore. They received the word. I keep thinking of the parable of the soils or the parable of the hearts. Oh, they hear the word and immediately receive it with joy and effervescence and what have you. But that word just kept cutting and cutting and cutting, and they, enough of that. That word which challenged their hearts to conform to Christ. Oh, they didn't want to hear that. They immediately received the word with joy. But when persecution arises or the demands of the word arise, they don't want to hear that. I don't know what they thought. I keep thinking, what did you come out for in the wilderness to see? A reed shaken with the wind? What did you come out for in the wilderness to see? A man in soft raiment? Those who wear effeminate clothing are in king's courts. He just came out to see a prophet. He was a prophet and more than the prophet. John was more than the prophet. He was a man just preaching and teaching about me and my coming. That's all he did. People came out and saw, what is he about? What's his trip? It was like curiosity seeking. They really didn't come for the right reason. Many did, but the Pharisees did. Many people turned away. I don't live under any illusion about who I am and about people, especially many professing Christians in the church. I know that it is rare for anyone to really trust God's man because we really believe that he's just another dumb preacher. I'm going to get a hat. It's going to have, what is it going to have on it? JADP. And people are going to think, wow, that's a police department. No, it means just another dumb preacher. Because that's what people think. I mean, what does he know anyway? That's what people are, what do you know? Well, the better question is, whom did I know? Or who do I know? Not what do I know? You know, I know what God reveals in his word, but clearly that's not enough for many people. You know, they're going to do what they want to do anyway. They have their own will and desire, and I'm not going to compete with that. He knows God, and if you believe that God is speaking through him, then you should listen to him. That would be stupid. You know, God has always had vessels to speak through. That's anyone who knows anything about any Bible knows that God has always chosen men to speak through. I mean, why is that such a great mystery? Why would that be a mystery to you? It's ridiculous to think that God has never, you think that God has never had a human being to speak through. Well, who do you think he's been talking to? Birds? I mean, get real. He's always had spokesmen to speak through. And he's always had those who said nothing more than what he said in his word. Thus saith the Lord, boom, 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 boom. That's it. That's it. If you believe that God is speaking through this man or men, you ought to follow them. You ought to listen to what they're telling you. But if you don't, then you should go and find one that you believe God is clearly speaking through and follow him or them. And if you're so stupid that you don't believe that God is really speaking through any of them, then I would suggest that you never darken the door of any church for the rest of your insignificant life. Stay home and enjoy your sin. Because I cannot figure out for the life of me, why would you want to follow a man or men who are frauds, as well as a faith that, for all intents and purposes, is meaningless to you? Why would you waste your time? Go and enjoy your sin. You're going to perish in it anyway. There's no alternative to that. If you're going to get real, then get real. If God is speaking through the man or men, and he's clearly used them to give out the word to you, then you better listen, which is another Old Testament commandment. You better pay attention to what's being said. Verse 12, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, by any means they might attain to Phoenicia, and there to winter, which is the haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. So, contrary to Paul's advice, the majority decided best to sail on to a more convenient harbor to winter in. Now, the Fair Havens was not such a place, so they sailed along the southern coast of Crete, and they hoped to reach the harbor of Phoenicia and there to pass the winter in. That was their hope. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence they sailed close by Crete. Looks pretty good. You know, Paul's a buffoon, shipmaster and a ship owner. Yep, they were right. Winds are nice and soft. Uh-oh. Did everything just go off? This go off? Okay, in that case, just, is there a message on it?
It's black.
Okay, just put the plug back in. And, guess we can't do any more with that. Anyway, let's get back to this. At least we got this going for us. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes stuff just blows up. Again, it's old equipment. Old equipment blows up. It gets old. So it looked pretty good. Everything looked good, you know. The shipmaster and the ship owner, looks like what they said was correct. And they thought because the winds blew softly, they were in control of the situation. Verse 14, let's see what happened. But not long after, there rose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. So they're going around, everything is nice and soft, and the winds are blowing real nice. And they thought, yeah, we were right, and Paul was wrong. But suddenly, and without warning, there rose a whirlwind, or a hurricane-like wind called Euroclydon. Now, Euroclydon, for those who sailed and were the unfortunate recipients of Euroclydon, it just happens. You don't see it coming. It just, boom, it just hits you. So you think everything is great, and all of a sudden, here comes this violent agitation wind, Euroclydon. And so powerful was the wind that it raised huge waves. And it wasn't that the wind was in front of them or behind them. The wind arose around them. So this verse 15, and when the ship was caught, could not bear up under the wind or up into the wind, we let her drive. So the winds were surrounded the vessel. Okay? And it seized the ship. It literally gained control of the ship itself. So it was carried about by the winds. So it could not withstand the winds, or the ship was out of control. So the decision, as if there was any other, was to let the ship go to the control of the wind. They couldn't do anything anyway. So their decision was, well, we'll see. Let it go, because there's nothing we can do. We can't stop it. We can't change the direction. All of our skills, meaningless at this time. We're helpless to do anything but let the ship go by giving her to the power of the sea. Verse 16, and running under a certain island which is called Clauda, we have much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. So Clauda was a small island about 25 miles south of Crete, provided a brief respite from the powers of the wind. Brief, I might add. So while they were south of the island, they hauled in the lifeboat, which normally pulled in tow, but was probably full of water. So now they had this opportunity. They decided to get the lifeboat into the boat itself. And when it says undergirding the ship, it refers to bring together or bring the ships together laterally with girths or cables to enable it to survive the force of waves and the tempest. But they were concerned of running into Syrtis or Syrtes, which was between Carthage and Chrysaenia, which was full of shallows and sandbanks and therefore destructive to ships, so they allowed the ship once again to be placed to the hands of the winds. They didn't have much of a choice. And we, verse 18, being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. So violent was the winds that the ship was tossed around mercilessly. Exceedingly tossed with a tempest. So they had to start throwing out cargo. Okay? They wanted to lighten the ship in the hopes that the weight of the ship would not cause it to break at the violence of the wind. So they just start throwing overboard cargo. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. So any apparatus or equipment or furniture that was not mandatory was being thrown overboard. They just started throwing stuff off the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest laid on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. Wow. So day after day after day, the storm continued to rage. There was no let up of the storm at all. They saw no stars. They saw no moon, which would have guided them or at least given them some idea of their location. Many days they were in this condition. Many days. So all hopes of being rescued from the storm was completely gone. I mean, as far as these men were concerned, as far as everyone in that boat was concerned, they all just succumbed to death. It was over. They figured this is a hopeless situation. and we're never going to be saved. Well, remember what happened at the first. They didn't listen to Paul. Okay? And Paul, of course, people say we shouldn't tell people I told you so. Yeah, you should. Verse 21. But after a long absence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. He wanted them to remember. He wanted them to remember because what he's going to tell them in their hopeless circumstance situation was going to give them the only hope and comfort they needed. You shouldn't have done this. He's saying you should have listened. I mean, now that all the hope was gone as far as man was concerned, didn't mean all the hope was gone as far as God is concerned, or God's man was concerned. And the point is that it's shameful that oftentimes people have to suffer needlessly because they do not listen to the man of God. Well, I know what he said, but I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. Okay, well, that comes with a price. Sometimes painful price. Sometimes a very painful price. People, they don't want to hear. Okay. No, there would have been a time years ago I might argue you up and down the sideways. I'm old now. I'm just going to say what God says. I'm going to stand back and watch. That's all I can do. I've let a lot of people go last year and the year before that. And I'm sure maybe this year I'll let more go. But I'm not in the business of begging and what have you. That's crazy. You know, if you don't know who I am by now, okay. If that matters to you, then what I say out of this Bible should matter to you. And if it doesn't, okay again. People do not read words carefully will miss what Paul said. Paul wasn't being very timid about what he was saying, not at all. He made it very clear that they should have listened to what he had told them. In fact, the words sirs is an unfortunate translation. It's really an interjection. So what Paul is saying was, oh, you ought to have certainly obeyed me and not have launched from Crete and gained this harm and damage. Oh, you should have listened. That's what he said. Oh, you should have listened. He was serious. He was speaking to someone who was in the command of what was going on. The words you should have hearkened means to obey a ruler or a superior. God's man should be listened to, but unfortunately, so many want to try to find out, and they do it the hard way. But what's the cost? The cost of learning out the hard way, it just doesn't affect you. It affects others as well, and sometimes irreparable damage is caused because we didn't listen. We want to do things our own way. Okay. There's a price to pay. And if you want to pay it and others have to pay it because of you, okay. So there's no hope here. This situation is done, and Paul reminds them it's over. No, Paul reminds them it's not over. You should have listened to me. Verse 22, but now I exhort you, be of good cheer. What? Be of good cheer? Yeah, be of good cheer. For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. He said they needed to take courage and be cheerful. What, Paul, you kidding? Don't you see the condition that we're in? We have no hope. Can't you see and feel the ship being tossed along and uncontrollable? Now think about the situation here. The ship is being tossed about uncontrollably, and Paul stands there. Well, I don't know about standing. He's in the midst of them. I don't know how. He's holding on a lot of something, and he's there in the middle of all these people clinging to him or whatever, and said, "Be of good cheer." Be of good cheer. Yeah, that's what he says. Now you know that God was at work here. Notice that before he made the statement to these passengers, he reminded them, all that heard him before was warning them not to leave. And this was important because he had to be believed, and in fact, because of the results that they were going through, there was no argument from anyone. Yeah, well, he told us not to leave, and he told us what would happen, and what he said is happening is happening. And then he says, be a good cheer. Well, he already told us what he told us is going to happen, and it's happening the way he said it was going to happen, so I think we better believe Paul. And so there's no debating here. There's no argument from, the centurion. There's no argument from anybody. They all are listening to Paul. God's man was on the scene bringing hope in a hopeless situation. He told them that no one would die, but the ship would be lost. And even in that, I think people go like, yeah, but Nehemiah should be, no. Just believing now, because when I read it, I went like, that doesn't seem rather comforting, but I know it is. Yeah, there's not going to be no harm, but we're not going to have a ship. Oh, that should be interesting. Okay. And this is the reason why Paul wasn't just talking and giving meaningless human pep talk, because that wouldn't matter. He didn't just say, don't worry, be happy, because it make the people feel good before they die. There was a divine reason why Paul spoke the way he did. Verse 23, for there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Paul said, I worship God. This wasn't the first time that Paul had a vision that lifted up his spirits. We already saw this in chapter 18, verses 9 and 10, and in chapter 23, verse 11. We already saw it. In fact, in Jerusalem, the vision he had in chapter 23, verse 11, God promised not only safety there, but ultimately a safe journey to Rome. A safe journey? In other words, he would get there. The means of how he got there wasn't all that good, but he got there. So in verses 23 and 24 of this chapter, God, through an angel, promised that Paul would stand trial before Caesar. Wherefore, sirs, verse 25, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Wow. So twice in the text, Paul urged his shipmates, all of them, all these prisoners, to keep up their courage. To be of good cheer is used only 3 times in the entire New Testament. Twice here in James 5:13. The verb has the idea of having good feelings or being good spirits. Again, the ship is being thrown around. There's no moon, no stars. They don't know what's happening. The ship is at the mercy of the winds. They don't even know how many days this has taken place. And Paul's saying, be of good cheer, for I believe God. Even as a prisoner, Paul did not hesitate to make known his faith in God. And it was because of his faith in God that he believed that God was going to fulfill exactly what he promised. And listen, again, the text is clear that God had given everybody in that ship to Paul. In other words, if Paul was going to get to Rome, everyone else would get there too. Everyone of the prisoners would get to where they need to go. Because God protected Paul, everyone in that ship was going to be protected as well. God was going to fulfill exactly what he had promised. Another point that's very interesting is that if you compare Paul's attitude in 23:11 and this passage, he is more cheerful in a situation that was far more dangerous. He is more cheerful in a situation that was far more dangerous. The strength that God gives always matches the trial and exceeds it. That's a good point. The strength that God gives always matches the trial and exceeds it. The strength that God will give a person at the time of their darkest hour will exceed that test and trial if they believe God. That's not hyperbole, that's reality. Verse 26, howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Everyone's going to be safe, but they would be shipwrecked on another island. And this was the revelation that the angel gave to Paul and Paul gave to them. Paul didn't hold back. Verse 27, when the 14th night was come, 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. So 14 nights the ship is at the mercy and the power of the storm. The sailors supposed that they were nearing land. It was possible that the sailors may have thought they heard waves against some shore, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms, and when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. So the crew threw out a weight and found that the sound of the depth was about 120 feet, and then a little time later they did the same thing and it was 90 feet. And it was very critical at that moment to stop the ship, because there's a possibility that the ship would crash against the rocks or the sand and it would really break up. Verse 29, then fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast out 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. So again, their fear is that they would crash upon the rocks in the sea. They dropped 4 anchors from the back of the ship and wished for daylight to come. Verse 30, and as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under the color, as if though they were or would have cast anchors out of the foreship. Now see, the sailors knew that land was near. And of course they were selfish and concerned for their own lives. So they devised a scheme to get to the small boat that was in the larger ship so they could flee the grain ship and get the land, which if they attempted that, they probably would have been killed. I mean, they're still at the mercy of the waves, and if the larger vessel couldn't sustain the waves, what would make them think some little rowboat's going to do any better? It's kind of crazy. So they loosened the small boat into the sea as though they were casting out another anchor from the forward part of the ship, and Paul knew what they were doing. Interesting how Paul just seems to know this stuff, even though he's just another dumb preacher. But he knows exactly what they're trying to do. And other people are watching, I'm sure, and they don't get it, but he watches and he gets it. How he knew was not important. That he knew was. Paul said to the centurion, verse 31, and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. So Paul addressed Julius and his troops and told them that unless the sailors stayed in the ship with everyone else, no one would be saved from death. And why is that? Why is that? Why did the sailors have to stay in the ship?
Because everybody was going to be saved.
Okay, but why did the sailors have to stay in the ship?
Because the weather was still bad.
Almost. Keep going. They were the ones who had to guide the boat. I mean, without you don't have the. They don't have. They're the only ones who know how to guide the vessel. Period. And when it talks about being saved, it's not talking about salvation in the spiritual sense. It's talking about being saved from death. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, the sailors were needed to try to get the ship guided to the best place possible. No one else in the ship could do what they were trained to do. Their expertise was needful. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So now they're committed. They don't have any escape plan. And whilst the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat or food, saying, this is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you to take some food, for this is for your health, for there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. Food really was on their minds. They were consumed about other pressing matters, such as surviving. But Paul, once again, taking charge of the situation, told these men to eat because it was going to give them the strength to be able to get to shore. That's what he talks about in verse 34. For this is for your health. It's not a health issue of vitamins and minerals. It's an issue of being strong enough physically to be rescued from the destruction of the ship when it runs aground. So again, Paul reminded them, he keeps reminding them, not a single one of them would suffer any injuries whatsoever. Verse 35, and when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all of good cheer, and they also took some food. Just like his Lord took food and blessed it publicly and in their presence, began to eat, same thing that Paul did. This gave confidence to the rest of the passengers to eat themselves. God's man is certainly unappreciated in so many circles today, but people are spiritually crashing amongst the rocks of false doctrine, making shipwreck of their professed faith. All they need to do is to follow the counsel of God's messengers and be blessed. It's so simple, yet so many will have to be lost to the seas and the waves and rocks their own destruction. Unfortunately, I might add. The man of God can bring peace in a very tumultuous situation. When all hope is gone, he can be the lightning rod that God will use to bring up higher the spirits of the people, if they would give up their own ways and follow after the Lord. It's that simple. Verse 37, and we were all in the ship 216 souls, in other words, 276 total passengers. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. It's interesting that they would not get paid if they threw over the cargo, which was wheat. However, that would be the least their concerns, that they were dead. So they threw all that. Once they got enough food, then they threw everything out. They had to lighten the ship. The lighting of the ship would cause the ship to sail higher in the water. It would make it more maneuverable in shallow waters. That's why they had to get rid of all this cargo. If the cargo weighed the ship down, it would cause them potential damage by running into the ground or into the rocks. If they lighten the ship, it would float a little bit higher. I like the way the Bible, gives a perfect nautical story, and no other books of antiquities that I know of does this, except the Bible. This entire voyage right here is perfect and in its accuracy. Verse 39, and when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with the shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. So when daylight they had hoped for and prayed for came, they saw a bay with a beach, and took counsel together and thought to drive the ship into the bay. They didn't know where this land was, but it was not important at this point. Just get this ship into this land, get it into this beach. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made towards shore. They cut off the anchors, gave themselves once again to the mercy of the seas. They cut the ropes that held the rudders or the steering oars, lifted up the topsail or the foresail, and made for the beach. They're just going to drive that ship right into the beach. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the fore part stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. So the front of the ship ran aground on a reef or a channel of mud and clay. That's what they wanted, okay? And they got stuck. The back of the ship was being torn in pieces by the strength of the waves. So the ship is stuck. The front part is stuck into the sand, into the clay. The back part is being destroyed by the wave. In other words, it's time to get off the ship. Any hope of moving it from that position was gone. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners. Everyone's got an agenda. Just stop with your agendas. First, the people who could sail the ship want to get off. Okay. Now you have the soldiers who are guarding the prison want to kill the prisoners. Who steps up? Paul again. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. Well, where are they going? I mean, it wasn't anything personal against the soldiers. It was the fact that they would be held responsible if any of them escaped. They would be put to death. So the alternative in their minds was the legal one, that's to kill the prisoners. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded them that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped, all safe to land. So Julius, His action was emphatic. He was committed to bringing Paul to Rome. Why? Because God's angel and the Lord himself assured Paul time and time again that this is where he was going to go. And they were not there yet, rather, so God in his great sovereignty controlled all the affairs of Paul's circumstance and the people as well to accomplish his will. So Julius commanded everyone to swim to land. Those who knew how to swim, they were the first to swim to the land. Everyone else was to use whatever was available to help keep them afloat until they got there. So some used planks, others used the ship's debris to get to land. And guess what happened? Every single soul made it to the land just as the man of God said would happen. Every single one of them. Yeah, the man of God is, he's useful. He definitely showed himself useful this entire encounter. No question about that. Lord, thank you again. And we pray that we would gain and grow in our confidence to you, Lord. And that we would see that even in the midst of the most horrible circumstances, that you, Father, your man, will lead in the right direction. Lord, this is a great, great chapter. And tonight, as we wrap up our study in this series, we pray that you would just get our hearts excited about where we go from here in the Epistle to the Hebrews. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Tonight, we're going to wrap up our study in the book of Acts. I know what happened to our equipment, so I'll deal with that later. But it's good to have you all here today. Lord willing, 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, we'll be back and finish the 28th chapter of the book of Acts. And time permitting, we'll probably get into a short introduction into the Epistle to the Hebrews. So have a wonderful afternoon, whenever time you see this. And Lord willing, we'll see you back here tonight at 4. God bless.